behalf of the Lahore Literary Festival, I am Qazi Shaukat Fareed in New York, with the pleasure to have a conversation with Dr. Azra Raza. About Azra Raza, one need not say too much because she's one of a kind, as we were discussing earlier. And I was going to say that the Raza family has given 7 brilliant people who are the pride and joy of Pakistan here in New York, and Dr. Raza is the jewel in the crown. So it is truly a great pleasure, and she has made such an important contribution in every area that she touches that it is one feels very proud. She's a scientist, a doctor, an oncologist, a thinker, and a woman of letters. She's the author of 2 books, one on Ghalib, and now the latest one is on cancer. 2 themes that could not be more different. And previously, she addressed the Lahore Literary Festival telling us about woke. I don't think anybody had heard of that word at that time, and a lot of people in the hall were perplexed. What is this woke? I hope Pakistanis have now woken up to woke. But and then at the Lahore Literary Festival in New York at Asia Society, you did Ghalib also. So we know you very well. Everybody knows you and loves you very much. So it is a double pleasure. Now our theme is science and literature. And in the beginning, I was wondering that maybe they are very diverse. But the more I read your book, the last one, cancer, the more I think that probably that book could fall in the category of literature as well. So there is science and literature right there on book. But since you combine both the areas, you are Ghalib expert. I would not say Ghalib expert, but you are better expert than the experts, the way you talk about Ghalib and the way we have been hearing you. So you are absolutely the right person to be talking to us on the combination of these 2 things. So I'd like to begin, if you don't mind, with your first book, the Ghalib, the Epistemologies of Elegance. The title itself is so elegant that it took me a little time to get to it, which you co-authored with Sarah Suleri Goodyear, another iconic Pakistani. Could you tell us about how that book came about and how you got diverted in that direction? Why did you choose to write Ghalib to begin with? And why did you select Sarah to co-author with?
Yes, thank you. First of all, to Lahore Literary Festival, Razi, Nussi, Iman, all of you. You started by asking a very important question of me about my interest in Ghalib, my interest in, as a reader of Ghalib, not a scholar of Ghalib at all. This is a very interesting background because soon after I came to America and finished my residency, I started something that I called Urdu Mehfil back in Buffalo in early 1980s. And the idea was that I grew up in a family that had migrated from India to Pakistan literally on August 14th, 1947. And my mother was from Aligarh, my father was from Lucknow. And I think they had a bit of a immigrant's anxiety about maintaining, sustaining, promoting their culture that was so dear to them, their tehzeeb, which had been developed and evolved over thousands of years. And I think part of their nature was that unless they quoted a sher of Ghalib or Mir, nothing was complete. No conversation could be brought to a closure without an appropriate and witty sher. And as children, we were made to memorize, just like we memorized the Quran, ayats of the Quran. We were made to also memorize the asatiza, the great poets, Anis and Ghalib and Mir and Dabir and so on. So it was only natural that there was, once you start to understand the meaning of the words, you would feel like, well, this is something we should know more about. And that's why I started this Urdu Mehfil. And me and my friend Seema and my older sister, Dr. Azra Raza, Bibi, we call her, who happened to be in Buffalo also, with several sharas open in front of us to try and understand it. And this weekly Mehfil continued for the next 20 years in various cities where I lived, inviting all kinds of people. And through it, I read the Diwan-e Ghalib twice with sharas completely. And even after having done that, you won't believe it, Shaukat, but I felt like people hadn't done justice to Ghalib, that there were whole new areas that I could see and wanted to interpret with a different sensibility, which combined Eastern and Western sensibilities. This brought us to 1989. I was living in Cincinnati, and I happened to find a book called Meatless Days by Sarah Suleri. So I bought it. I was completely blown away by it. Sarah was professor of English at Yale. I wrote to her, invited her to be a guest of Urdu Mehfil, and she came. And the interesting thing that happened, Shaukat, was that the day after we had a fantastic Mehfil with Sarah, she and I were talking, and I asked her that she grew up in Lahore, and we were talking about some poets from Lahore, and suddenly she recounted this story to me. She said when she was a kid around 9 or 10 years old, her older sister Iffat, her older brother Shahid, and Sarah herself were being tutored by a wonderful gentleman in Urdu. And he read this sher to the three of them. Chalte ho to chaman ko chaliye. कहते हैं कि बहारा है, पात हरे हैं, फूल खिले हैं, कम कम बादो बारा है. And the teacher asked the three of them, what word do you think is the most important one in this sher? And Sarah was the youngest of the three, and she immediately picked on it, and she said, कहते हैं. चलते हो तो चमन को चलिए, कहते हैं कि बहारा है. That, oh, this is why we are ravished by Urdu. So I read to her immediately the Maqta, or actually the last sher. कोह कनो मजनू की खातिर, दश्तो कोह में हम न गए, इश्क में हमको मीर निहायत पासे इज्जतदारा है. चलते हो तो चमन को चलिए, कहते हैं कि बहार. What struck me immediately was that Sarah gets it. At 9 years of age, whether she's so familiar with Urdu or not, with the words or not, she gets the meaning. And so I knew I had found my partner, Shaukat. Does that explain it?
No, it explains it beautifully. Now,
one more thing I want to say is that I read this sher to Sarah. Koh kano majnun ki khatir, dashto koh mein hum na gaye, ishq mein humko meer nihayat. This is the Maqta, paas se izzat dara hai. So this is a meer sher. I immediately talked to Sarah and I said, Sarah, we have to do Ghalib now, because Mir says कि वो तो कोह कन और मजनू की वजह से दश्त में नहीं जाएंगे. Look at what Ghalib says. पेशे बगैर मर ना सका कोह का नसद, सर गुश्ते खुमारे रसूमो कुयूद था. The apocryphal story, you know, is कि Shireen and Farhad was in love with her, but Shireen's family said कि you have to bring a neher through the mountains and a stream through the mountains, and only then we will give you her hand. And he started doing that and almost made it, and the family got nervous. So they sent an old woman to tell him before he would complete the task that Shireen has died. That happened when Farhad heard that, he took the same spade that he was digging with and hit himself on the head and died. But Ghalib is actually saying that, look, Farhad needed an instrument to kill him. If he was a real ashik like me, he should have
not
just
be.
passed out.
Right.
Just died. Peshe baghair mar na saka. So look at the difference between Mir and Ghalib. Mir is saying, I don't want to even step into that dash because itni izzat hai Farhad aur Majnun ki. And Ghalib is saying, I'm much better than. So I enticed Sara immediately into doing Ghalib with me, although it took us a few years, because at another point, Ghalib also says, Di saadgi se jaan, padun koh kan ke paon. This is Ghalib also. Di saadgi se jaan, padun koh kan ke paon. Hai haath kyun na toot gaye peere zan ke paon. Why didn't that old woman die before she took her? How beautiful. So he can go both ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I think one thing that Ghalib set the bar for lovers very high when he claimed, that he should have died himself. He didn't need an instrument. This raises two issues with me. Your initial remarks about myself and Rafat, we are both from the Foreign Office, as was your father. So there is a link that probably attracted us towards you because you were the daughter of one of our colleagues from the Foreign Office. So that also was a pleasure. Now, you talked about memorizing and all that. These are wonderful traditions. How many shares or verses do you know by heart now?
I mean, I haven't counted them, but why not say 10,000, 1 lakh? Who's going to count? But I would say that one of my greatest pleasures, and as you know, I'm a runner and I run 3 to 5 miles every day. While I'm running, I like to memorize poetry, whether it's English or Urdu, both actually, with equal delight. So Dante's Paradiso, the 33rd canto, 146 lines, I can recite.
And not today, thank you.
Okay.
No, but I mean, this is are all your siblings with the similar retention of, memory? They can remember things. हमें तो एक आज पढ़ेंगे तो शाम को नहीं याद रहती.
I think it depends on your interest and the way things were sort of tattooed on our cerebrum earlier on in life. That all my siblings have fantastic memories and are able to come up with great shares which are appropriate for the moment. But not only that, as you know, Shaukat, my daughter Shehrazad, her memory is 10 times better than mine.
Oh my God.
And she can recite fantastic. When she was like 4.5 years old, I have a beautiful tape of her saying, I know 62 Ghalibs.
Oh, very, very nice. अच्छा ये बताएं कि सारा सुलेरी जिन्हें मैं भी I also know her very well. How was it working with her? I mean, you said it took 2 years. What did you? Why?
No, it took us several years to get started because life intruded and we were distracted. I was going through a lot. Sarah went through a lot, but eventually I moved to Massachusetts. I was very close to Sarah now. And when her husband died, Austin Goodyear,
right,
then she was also grieving. And that's when she basically came and stayed with me for an entire year. I can say that it was one of the most profound pleasures I have had is to do this book, Epistemologies of Elegance with Sarah, because her sensibility, her intelligence, her depth of her understanding, and her knowledge that she brings from different disciplines are simply unmatched in my experience. And I know a lot of smart people, a lot of Nobel laureates. I have never met anyone like her except Kuratullah and Heather, the great writer Annie Appa, who also happened to be a very close friend of mine. These two women are just phenomenal. So it was the greatest pleasure, greatest fun, because we would read a share of Ghalib and then debate it back and forth, sometimes for 2 and 3 days. And once we decided on an interpretation that we agreed on, then Sarah would say to me, okay, Azra, let me now put it into difficult English.
Difficult.
And I couldn't say a word after that because her English is so phenomenal, but we agreed on the interpretation. You know, Harold Bloom, who was also, I knew him through another friend, and Sarah, of course, worked with the great Harold Bloom. So I asked him to give us a blurb. And when I called him to get the blurb after he had read the book, he said, Azra, you're saying there are two authors to the book, but I only see one voice.
Wow.
Yeah, so I said exactly, you've hit on it with the hit the nail on the head, because basically the idea is that we both bring complementary strengths to the table. I understand the Urdu part very well, the background, the poetry, and Ghaliba had spent 20 years seriously reading and studying. And Sarah brings, her ability to express and her profound ideas from a different sensibility. So, yes, there is one voice, but there are two people behind that voice.
Fantastic. Now, do you have a copy of the book just on your shelf? Please have a look at this book with a beautiful cover. And I don't know whether it is available in Pakistan or not, but if it is, I think everybody should read it. I learned a lot from that book also.
About the cover, my younger sister, Dr. Azra Raza, who is the head of women's radiology at Harvard, she designed the cover, and it says, "Rome hai rakhsh umr kahan dekhiye thame, nehat baag par hai na paahe rakab mein." आपके घर तो इसकी painting Fida Hussain साहब की है, and he has drawn horses. But my sister, basically, it's a flight of a bird. Rome hai rakhsh.
Right. It's a beautiful book. I think we should ask LLF to make sure that copies are available in the bookstores in Pakistan. Now, rounding up this discussion, since Ghalib is such a layered poet, and you said that when you had this mehfil, you had several of the sharas in front of you, and they will compare, etc. So what, in your view, would be one verse or two verses that would epitomize Ghalib for you?
Oh. I thought I asked you to go easy on me.
Oh, this is like a softball to you.
Well, Shaukat, Ghalib is such a great intellectual and thinker, and he's also so witty. He has so many wonderful shares. So I guess it's all very personal. It's deeply what affects you deeply, which share of Ghalib. And actually, I do have one that I always remind myself of even today. Because it opened a door to a whole new world for me. And the background of this sher is that, of course, as you know, I grew up in Karachi, and my parents were forever reciting some sher or the other. As a teenager, once I read this book by Somerset Maugham, Of Human Bondage.
Oh, excellent.
Brilliant. A deeply moving portrayal of the price of passion. This is the bondage that Maugham is talking about. Submission to passion. And I always say that one thing I'm jealous of about men is that they make very good slaves. Women don't.
Uh-huh.
Men, once they sight an object of desire, then nothing else matters. They won't eat, they won't sleep, they'll neglect themselves, they'll neglect their families until they can obtain their object of desire. Single-mindedness. Women can't do that because we always have to worry about children. But this is the bondage, the human bondages that come from passion. And that's what happens in the book. Philip, the hero, his freedom evaporates, his education is halted, his fortune is squandered away because he's just madly in love with this woman, Mildred. But then eventually when he comes to his senses and she has betrayed him so many times that finally he uses his reason, everything comes back to normal in his life. And then around that time, Shaukat, I was hardly 14 or 15 years old when I read this book, and I was obsessed with it for a while. And one of those days, my father read this sher of Ghalib. Hasti ke mat fareeb mein aa jaye yo asad. He's using Asad as the khallus, so before he turns 24. Think of the profundity of that. Hasti ke mat fareeb mein aa jaye yo asad. Alam tamam halqe dame khayal hai. Don't be fooled, don't be deluded by this deception of existence, because the whole world, the universe lives in your mind. And it occurred to me that what took Somerset Maugham 611 pages to say, Ghalib has said in 14 words. Hasti ke mat fareeb mein ajayi asad, alam tamam halqe dame khayal hai. It is one of the first shairs I taught Shehzad, my daughter. And every now and then we recite it to each other when we have things going on, worrying us, needlessly becoming concerned. We remind ourselves, Alam tamam halqe dame khayal.
All right. Now, I think we have had a nice discussion on Ghalib and his poetry. And now I think let's move to your new book called The First Cell. I have a copy here, and I want everybody to see it. It's one of the most important books I have ever read in my life. And I tell you why. I was very reluctant to read it, but out of friendship for Dr. Saiba, I said, okay, I'll read it. I read it, but I then did not read it. And only recently I reread it because I wanted to be an honest interlocutor on this book. Now, apart from many things, this is a book which has a major indictment against the big pharma and the way the treatment strategies and drugs that are the stock in trade for oncologists today. And Dr. Azra has said that there has been no fundamental change in cancer treatment since the 70s. And the research trade that is 80% useless, and yet much of the funding goes to it, global funding. So my question to you is, how did you, what were the impulses that triggered you to write this book? Because it's a very tough book, it's a very challenging book. And I think I mentioned to you that it is not a book for the faint of heart, but once you start it, you cannot stop it. It sort of brings you in and sucks you in. And although there are a lot of medical aspects to the book, but for me, the emotional part of the book, the empathy part of the book, the way you interact with your patients, the various patients who you have cited their narratives. So I want to see how you got started. Why did you feel the need? Was it an impulse to fight the big pharma and fight this bogus treatment that is being given? Or was it something else?
I think it was a combination of everything, Shaukat, and a combination of the fact that I have lived now in this country for 43 years. And the treatment that I was giving with a combination of 2 chemotherapy drugs when I arrived here in 1977 is exactly the same that I'm giving in 2021.
Terrible.
So can you imagine the state of my frustration, depression? Clearly something is not working. I lost my own husband, who was head of the cancer center, to the very disease he had dedicated his life to cure. He died of leukemia. And so even then, I am an oncologist and very busy life, crazy life, a scientist with a laboratory, and so didn't have the time until the impetus for writing the book came in 2017. My daughter Scheherazad's best friend not her boyfriend, because Andrew was gay, but her best friend, Andrew, at 22 years of age, got diagnosed with the most deadly brain tumor known to man, glioblastoma multiforme. The survival rate for this tumor is 2% at 18 months. And those 2% would die within 20 months also. When he came out of surgery, and the neurosurgeons could only remove part of the tumor because it was a 9-centimeter mass that had invaded into vertebrae and everywhere. When he was told his diagnosis so confidently, Shaukat, this 22-year-old turned to his mother and said, "Mom, don't worry, just call Azra. She's on the cutting edge of cancer. She'll cure me." Elena called me, his mother. I met them at the ICU. And these words slapped me in the face, physically. Because on the one hand was the viciousness of his cancer, on the other, the complete helplessness of all his treating oncologists. How are we failing these 22-year-olds? How is this happening? And so, और सब भूल गए हर्फ सदाकत लिखना, रह गया काम हमारा ही बगावत लिखना.
Kya baat. Talking about Bhagavat, etc., I mean, about your book, you just started talking about cancer and all that sort of thing, which is very heavy stuff. But then you have in your book more than 50 quotations from philosophers and poets, Western and Eastern, from Umar Khayyam to Ghalib to Iqbal, from Shakespeare to Auden and Emily Dickinson. That is a remarkable, and the other thing is that they fit in. They're not forced. I see a lot of these books which are, somebody is quoting Alice in Wonderland. So every chapter has some quotation from Alice in Wonderland. It's nice, it's cute. But the way you have done it, it sort of evokes something so technical with something so philosophical or poetical. So I will, from your own writing, I like to mention a few things, words that there are many words, but just I selected a few. Like you use the word infrasound of approaching disaster. Hello? Or cancer rules over the host with despotic autocracy. Now, this is what you were talking about. Brain tumor, right on top. I mean, there's no escape. Or here's another one which I like very much, is Jeremiah's alone are pointless unless a new strategy accompanies the lamentations. Yeah, we can complain all we want to complain. But unless you are prepared to do something about it and have new thoughts, it is, hey, come on. In Egypt, they hire women and men over the funeral so that they can walk with the funeral and lament and cry and all that sort of thing. They are all for hire. So there is no, all that kind of thing is quite bogus. Or you said, to begin the ending, one must end the beginning. This comes from the first cell. And so in a way, each of these things, and there are hundreds of them, and there is another one that, hit me a lot, was I could not provide a better life. Could I have provided a better death? I mean, this, and then you bring in the Greek concept of death denial, etc. We'll come back to that just in a little while. But so your book sort of kind of brings in things from here and there, and everything comes to the same point. I just thought I'd just read this part about death denial, because I like very much the concept of dignity in dying, death. I mean, you say death is not a failure. Now, I mean, death is the logical conclusion of life. If you're alive, you're going to die. But how you die, that is the issue. So I quote from a little bit from you this is from page 7 of your book. A society and culture obsessed with winning views of the death. Cancer patients are a failure. Sorry, obsessed with winning views, they view the death of cancer patients as a failure and therefore the subject best to be avoided. Dying is not a failure. Denying death is. The Western mind, portrayed at least by the classical literary canon, has not always been in denial. The depiction of suffering in Greek tragedy was meant to produce a paradoxical catharsis in its audiences, seeing their worst nightmares enacted openly on stage, debating the consequences of action and identifying with the characters in the play that would dispel the fear of pain and death. Now, what I would like to ask you is that you're right. I think there is also a stigma. Oh, usko cancer ho gaya hai, and then there is these days they say, how did he die? Did he die of COVID? So everybody is now focusing on COVID, but otherwise, cancer is a bad word. It's a terrible word, and it becomes a बेचारे को कैंसर हो गया. I mean, I don't know. There is a negative thing about it, and therefore somebody dies. So, and then there is another thing that they fought bravely with death. I want to understand what that means, and I want to understand what is. If you have yourself said that treatment creates, you can die with the disease or you can die with the treatment. And the treatment can be more harmful than the disease. So you lose dignity in death. So at a philosophical level, I mean, we'll talk about the medical science later on, but at a philosophical level, what are you trying to say?
Well, they say that the two words in the English language that make one the happiest are, it's benign.
Right. Okay.
Exactly what you've been saying. Shaukat, I wrote this book because I realized that the paradigm which has developed in America, and America, let's face it, is the leader in science and technology, which means
absolutely.
in the world. So this is the universal paradigm. The paradigm that was developed in 1970s is that whatever cancer we can detect early with screening measures like mammography, colonoscopy, PSA, etc., we can treat with slash, poison, burn, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. But a third of the patients who will present with advanced disease already, for them, we should try to study advanced disease, metastatic disease, and try to kill every last cell. Well, the last 50 years, since 1970 to 2020, we have been trying that model of chasing after every last cell and trying to kill it. 90% or 95% of the National Cancer Institute's budget goes towards supporting this end-stage research on end-stage disease. Finally, after I have done a lot of that research myself, but I have realized that the only thing which saves lives is early detection. So why not use today's latest technology and employ it at every level to find cancer even before it becomes that C word at a pre-cancer level, the earliest perturbations when the first cell is being formed, and zap it out of existence right there and then, so it doesn't become the bona fide disease. That's the whole concept of let's shift our strategy that has become stagnant since 1970 to 2020, and let's try a new strategy now, go after the first cell instead of the last cell. That's the whole thesis of the book.
Fine. So in that context, I would ask you, how do you find it? How do you find the first cell? I mean, with the current technology, with whatever you have at your methodologies, etc., what you have, how do you detect it? And in that context, I know that your involvement with this thing, maybe it was personal to begin with, but then it became deeply because of your own up close and personal experience with it. And you developed this MDS AML tissue repository, which has 60,000. So this is probably unique in the world. So does that fit in with your search for the first cell?
Yes. So, Shaukat, I started my career in America by studying and treating patients with acute myeloid leukemia. But by 1984, it was clear to me that in my lifetime, this disease will not be cured with the technology or the research we are doing. And so I turned my attention to studying. I thought many of my patients were giving stories of Dr. Raza, my blood counts were low 6 months or 2 years before I got this leukemia. I said, why not study that pre-leukemia stage? That stage is called myelodysplastic syndromes, MDS, pre-leukemia. So as far back as 1984, I turned my attention to early detection of acute leukemia by studying pre-leukemia. And when I made up my mind about that, and unfortunately I was right, because in 2020, I just told you, I'm still using the same drugs I was using back then. So I wasn't incorrect in my prediction. So I said to myself in 1984 that, look, if I'm going to study this disease, I should have patient samples. And I just started putting in the freezers blood and bone marrow samples from my patients. That kept collecting. So now I have longitudinally obtained samples as patients go through various stages of their chronic pre-leukemia, then develop acute leukemia. We treat them, they respond, and then eventually the terminal illness that takes their life.
Mm.
So imagine that I have all these serial samples on thousands of patients that no one else in the world thought of doing or has. I now have 60,000 samples. Not one single cell in this tissue bank comes from another oncologist. To this day, I do the bone marrows with my own hands. I draw the blood with my own hands. And every week I give my own blood as normal control, just to be run with the patients. Every single week I'm doing it. So this tissue repository is a very precious national resource. And now that the technology in genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, all these omics has come about, we can go in, examine the serial samples and trace it back to pre-leukemic stage and then ask the question, why did this person even get pre-leukemia? What was making them at high risk for getting pre-leukemia? And so I think that, and all that work, thanks to the book, is going on now. In fact, the genomics part has already been done on the entire tissue repository. The data are in the cloud, and we are now relating it to the clinical history of the patient. This is how I expect to find the first cell.
Fantastic. Why? So you think that this when you're chasing the last cell, which is the current strategy, and they are doing it because they see the patient at the last stage in any case. So I would argue that that process, when people are ill, they are looking for something, a prayer or anything. So trying to address the last cell is fine. But is there a more humane way of dealing with it? Is there I was very struck by the way you and your patients have bonded, have interacted, hope or no hope, but it is always there. So is there not a better way of recognizing the fact that the last cell is not going to give life? It's only bringing death sooner or later. But the condition of the patient becomes so bad, or the dignity in life is gone. So is there no focus on that apart from first cell?
Well, first, let me say that we are curing 68% of cancers that are diagnosed today. We are curing them. Only a third of them are at advanced stages. But the question I ask is, why are we still using slash, poison, burn, even on those 2/3? It's not an easy thing to go through. So and the other third, their prognosis and outcome is no different than it was in 1930 to 2020. If you have advanced disease, you're no better off than you were in 1930. Save for very few minor exceptions. So I don't want to take away from the progress we have made, but I also want to keep reminding us of the progress we still have to make, which is to find a compassionate solution for everybody. Not just the 1/3 with advanced disease, but the 2/3 who we are slashing and burning and poisoning need better treatments also in the future. So I do think that what I'm asking in the book is that, look, we have cancer patients now who are presenting with advanced disease. We can't turn off our eyes on them. I see 30 to 40 cancer patients every week myself. I can't close my eyes to them. I'm asking the national funding agencies that, look, just divide up the resources so that half the money goes to finding better solutions for advanced disease and the other half for early detection of the first cell. So half and half to, and my contention is that once the word processor came around, who thinks of the typewriter? The whole paradigm would shift once we show success of the first cell. Once we find earlier detection than we are doing now, I'm confident that in this coming decade, we will completely turn the paradigm from reactive to proactive, from treatment to prevention of every disease.
So the reductionist way, which is to go for the last cell, I think in your book, you mentioned your conversation with a brilliant Pakistani neurologist, unfortunately late now, Dr. Umayya. You had a very interesting, did it influence your thinking?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. How sweet of you. You really read the book carefully, Shaukat, because
Obviously.
it's a very small episode in the book, but something that affected me. When I was a resident and I was doing a stint at George Washington University in hematology, every day I would have lunch with the neurosurgeon there, who was this amazing Pakistani guy, Ayub Umayya.
Ayub.
What a beautiful person. He invented the Umayya reservoir, which can be placed directly into the ventricle and we can give chemotherapy through that. It's still being used. Dr. Umayya was one of the most thoughtful and amazing people I had met. We would have lunch every day together. One day I asked him the question, I said, Dr. Umayya, you're so involved in this, work on the brain. I wonder what is the seat of consciousness? How reductionist do we have to be? How molecularly, genetically, to the deepest level we have to go to find what human consciousness is? Where does it reside? Where is this hegemonic rule come from? What level of reductionist molecule do we have to get to? And he sat back, looked at me, smiled very sweetly, and he said, Azra, if you think that you want to discover the beauty of the Taj Mahal and you start taking it apart brick by brick to try and find its beauty, what will you end up with? Rubble, nothing. Human consciousness is like the end product of Taj Mahal. It is an emergent property, not the sum of its individual parts. You can't detect it. And I realize immediately that it is very parallel to my thinking about cancer, that cancer may be the manifestations of end-stage diseases, and I describe some of them very carefully about Harvey. That these manifestations that are really showing us kind of a harrowing battle between the body's immune system and this ever-increasing, invading, invasive kind of malicious, malevolent enemy, when it goes awry, every system in the body is getting affected. You're throwing emboli, you're wasting away the body, it becomes cachectic, fevers of unknown origin start appearing. All these manifestations are really emergent properties that we can't go and find in a gene. And I'll give you one last example of it. If you My office at Columbia University, the window overlooks the beautiful Hudson and George Washington Bridge. And when you see George Washington Bridge, you are likely to see traffic jams.
Right.
And if I want to find out why that traffic jam has occurred, looking into the engine of individual cars is not going to help me. Because the traffic jam occurred maybe one day because there was an accident, another day because a malicious, malevolent politician decided to avenge himself on the mayor of Fort Lee.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yes. So you see, to find the reason for a traffic jam, you don't look into the engines of individual cars standing there. This is what I'm saying about cancer. To find the reason for cancer, you don't look at one gene in cells and try to find one magic bullet to target that gene and think you will cure it. So we need a pluralistic approach of looking at the whole picture. And that whole picture becomes very complicated as disease advances, because the farther you go into the sea, the deeper it gets. And we have not reached that level of technological or intellectual sophistication to do that yet. So in the meantime, the easiest is work your way backwards, find the first cell, instead of worrying about all the emergent manifestations at the end stage level.
Okay, I hope we don't run out of time very soon, but because there are a lot of questions I'd like to ask you. One is that you have linked cancer and aging process, and you call cancer and aging are two sides of the same coin. But then in your book, there are many cases of Andrew, Henry W., JC, and Omar that are all young people. So before you answer that, I would also like, because I think there's a linkage with your concept of sand pile and mist. Yes. So could you put them together and explain to us?
A beautiful question, Shaukat. So you're absolutely right that young people can get cancer, but the difference is this. 1.7 million cancers are diagnosed in the elderly every year in America. In the children, 14,000 a year. So compare 14,000 to 1.7 million. I mean, yes, it happens, but it's very rare. Andrew, rare. Mostly cancer is a disease of the aging. So what has gone wrong in aging? I think of it as a sand pile. If you start dropping grains of sand, it will make a pile. It will keep rising, but then with one grain of sand, the whole pile can collapse. The grain of sand that caused the avalanche in the pile is no different than thousands of grains of sand that came before it.
Yeah.
So how did that one grain of sand cause the collapse? Because the pile had become unstable. And so with age, I often look at myself in the mirror in the morning and I'm so horrified. I tell myself, if this is what's happening on the outside, what is happening on the inside to my organs? Everything is aging.
Please don't worry. Everything looks fine.
So the point is that with age, a lot of things are unstable now. And so the tipping point can be reached by something so minor that in itself would not be carcinogenic in a young, healthy person who has an intact immune system and lots of, redundancy built in. So those are the ideas of why aging is the most a serious carcinogen, meaning it is the hotbed for cancer.
And what is MIST?
MIST is an acronym I use for, mutations, immune system, which has become decrepit,
fundamentally, these are the elements that occur out of aging process.
Aging process, yes. So that senescent cells are collecting mutations, immune system, senescent cells, and then, of course, there is also some physiologic distancing that occurs because of fat cells appearing and things like that. Just like I'm losing fat and wrinkles are appearing, the hematopoietic cells in the bone marrow, lots of fat cells appear, just the opposite. So there is tumor cells can find it much easier. So I think that my point is that, look, Cancer occurs because the first cell forms because it's responding to some kind of stress. And that stress is unbearable in older bodies. So if we really want to find the reasons for cancer, we have to study aging. What are those factors that are making people amenable or susceptible to develop cancer? And then the idea is that we should be monitoring healthy bodies, monitoring wellness to detect illness. Stop treating the human body as if we can take it for an annual checkup. Treat the human body as a machine that needs constant, continuous 24-hour dynamic monitoring so that we find the first steps of disease perturbations and intervene before it becomes.
Exactly. I just want to read one more part because it's remarkable. These are things that you know, and yet you don't know. You say, I've learned new things about what I thought I already knew, like the difference between illness and disease, between what it means to cure and to heal, between what it means to feel no pain and to feel well, about the harrowing nature of keeping appointments that one never made. Now, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I go to a doctor, I'm, so I'm looking to be, sorry, what is the difference between healing and curing?
Very simple. Ibne Maryam hua kare koi. Are mere dukh ki dawa kare koi. Even a prophet who can raise the dead, Lazarus he raised from the dead. Mere dil ki dawa unke paas nahi hai. So yes, you can cure, you can even raise the dead, but the healing part is the more difficult one.
I see.
And that's where you're walking patients through very terrible terminal stages of the disease, but being there for them and helping them at every step of the way and helping them both mentally and physically.
So as we go forward, I want to mention the First Cell Center for Cancer Research that you have established and the TOT, the oncology think tank that you have created with cooperation from 20 scientists. I know academics never agree with anything. They fight like whatever. So how were you able to build consensus in this thought with 20, and what is the role of your First Cell Center for Cancer Research?
What a great way to end this, because it's a very optimistic thing. I said to myself, Shaukat, that why should I be the only one saying this very obvious thing? Why not build a consensus? As soon as we went into the lockdown because of COVID, the idea was very clear. Okay, we should simply start Zooming. And the First Cell, the book itself, has had a tremendous effect on the psyche of the oncologists, because even if they cannot admit it in public, that I'm right, that what they're doing is really not something that we should continue doing for long. Privately, they all agree with me. It's like maslahat hai ki tawajjo hai ki ek sazish hai, ek dushman ne mere haq mein dua mangi hai. So what did I do? I got 30, actually not 20, 30 top leaders from academia, Harvard and MD Anderson and University of Chicago and Johns Hopkins and Columbia, all over, and industry leaders together to come into the oncology think tank. And we met 17 times, 2 hours each on Zoom. Imagine every single member out of these 30 people thinks they are at least halfway to pick up their Nobel Prize. So you're absolutely right. It is difficult to keep them focused on one aspect of what I'm talking about. But I was successful in getting the whole group to agree on a roadmap for the future of cancer research and what treatments are needed in terms of developing technology, education of the public, and policy change. And we published our opinion paper in Scientific American just 2 weeks.
That is what I was going to mention. I mean, you are now recognized by
2 weeks ago, we published in Scientific American with 30 names behind me. And this is now a consensus that is very hard to ignore. But one beautiful thing that came out of it is the first center for cancer survivors. Now, I don't want anyone to start getting anxious. If you have had cancer, please don't get anxious. But the reality is that 1 in 5 new cancer cases are diagnosed in someone who is a cancer survivor. And I think cancer survivors, if we study them, we should be able to understand better what are the stresses on their immune system, on their organs, in their, we can pick thousands and thousands of metabolites circulating in the blood and use them as a window into diseases, into what is causing the stress internally and prevent it. So all these universities came together with me to establish the first cell center for cancer survivors. Cancer survivors come for their regular checkups twice a year to Columbia University, MD Anderson, everywhere. We'll just take blood and urine and saliva from them and start banking it. Within 2 years, we'll have 40,000 samples. Some 200 of those 40,000 will have developed cancer. Now we have their pre-cancer blood and saliva and urine to look at through all the latest technology. That is how we will save the lives of cancer survivors. My own husband got his first cancer at 34 years of age. He survived this tormented disease and got his second completely unrelated leukemia at 57 and died a terrible death. It could have been prevented if we were studying him serially before he got this cancer. So the whole idea I have, the first cell is what we should be looking for before cancer makes its appearance. So I want to get rid of the word cancer from the lexicon of the language and get rid of it forever, because we will find precancerous first cells and get rid of them.
I would wish you luck in that one. But I want to remind you that at one of the lectures that you had organized dedicated to the memory of your husband, Harvey Preisler, there was a program whereby you could enter the program and they would have a chip or something and they would monitor your health while you are young and healthy. What happened to that?
Oh, it's FDA approved already. The chip is an M chip that got FDA approved for prostate cancer already, that you can put this chip and put a drop of blood in it at home. And the device at home will tell you what the PSA level is. So we are working now on a hydrogel chip that can be inserted under the skin that can monitor for the appearance of the first cell. But I think that what I need is help and understanding from everybody. मैं चाहता हूं निज़ामे कोहन बदल डालूं, मगर ये बात फकत मेरे बस की बात नहीं. उठो बढ़ो मेरी दुनिया के सारे इंसानों, ये सब की बात है, 2 4 10 की बात नहीं. I need help from all of you to come forward and support this universally applicable, compassionate, empathetic cure for cancer and get rid of this disease forever.
Well, I mean, I can wish you luck on behalf of everybody. Cancer is a much dreaded word. I think C word has become much more awful than any other word, that letter, sorry. And now I understand that your book will be launched in Pakistan next month. Any information on that?
Yes, Lightstone Publishers are bringing out the first cell in March, and I'm very excited about it. Looking forward to some great programs around it and getting reviews from all of you.
Well, first of all, so this is something that is really worth everybody's while to go through it and understand it, because cancer is present in our lives. Our somebody or the other, very close, a little bit of a distance, we have all these people who are, and we are dealing with them. So it is a good thing for
I'd
people.
like to say one thing about this, Shaukat, which is that, look, I see a lot of cancer patients every week for 35 years. I had a cancer research lab. But perhaps my most important credential for picking up my pen and writing the book is that I'm a cancer widow. And I have seen this when cancer entered my own family and completely disrupted everything for the next 5 years. It made me look at everything about cancer through the prism of human anguish, much more so than I was doing even before. Not that I changed as an oncologist, but my perception changed, my eyes changed completely. And so I do think that it is an urgent issue. If we can find a vaccine for COVID within a year, then it should not be very hard to find the first cell within the next 10 years. It just depends on our will and our desire to do it. The problem is we are not treating cancer as an urgent problem. To get one treatment experimental protocol through the various bureaucratic steps right now takes 1 year. 1 year at Columbia University. 6 months is minimum. To get the trial for remdesivir, which is treatment for COVID, it took us 10 days. You see the difference? That we are not treating cancer as an urgent problem. People are sitting in their labs studying mice like they were doing in 1970s. For God's sake, I'm trying to shake up everybody. But हम आह भी करते हैं तो हो जाते हैं बदनाम, वो कत्ल भी करते हैं तो चर्चा नहीं होता. I mean, this is the problem. We have to overcome it. I need everybody to buy into the new paradigm, find the first cell and stop chasing the last cell.
Absolutely, agree with you completely. This kind of brings us to the end of the time available to us. So just as we go, one share, one verse from you.
Always ready for it. You see, we've been talking about patience and I'm feeling so emotional already. Just because I am the one walking my patients throughout, all the way. And when you were talking about keeping appointments we never made, the harrowing nature of their diseases makes my life appear so simple in response. Zahir ki aankh se na tamasha kare koi, ho dekhna तो दीदे दिल वा करे कोई, और हो दीद का जो शौक तो आंखों को बंद कर है, देखना यही कि ना देखा करे कोई. Delve deep into it, not just what's on the surface, but go deeper. And then नज़ारे को तो जुम्बिशे मिशगां भी बार है. Once your eyes are set on the object of desire, then even blinking becomes an annoyance. नजारे को तो जुम्बिशे मिशगां भी बार है, नरगिस की आंख से तुझे देखा करे कोई. That's the commitment we need to get cancer written into history forever.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Azra. Thank you very much, LLF, for giving us this opportunity to talk about something very important that touches all our lives.
Thank you, LLF, and Marina and Shaukat, Zindabad.
Oh.
LLF, Zindabad. Pakistan, Zindabad. Thank you.
Thank you.